In the first failed proof for the existence of God, Bob Dutko, nationally syndicated Christian talk show host and apologist, tried to argue that the first law of thermodynamics proves God exists. The first law states that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed, and since our universe had a beginning in which there was neither matter nor energy as we typically understand them, that proves there must have been a God who created it all. As I pointed out, others have already dismantled this argument from a scientific stance, but I pointed out the absurdity of substituting a greater mystery for our current ignorance regarding the initial formation of our universe. One can't simply assert God did it and think that suffices as an argument. Indeed, such an assertion does nothing to build or advance our knowledge about the universe, but merely adds and then deepens another mystery about it. It's the worst kind of sloppy thinking. In Dutko's second proof for the existence of God, he asserts the second law of thermodynamics provides an argument that God exists. He states,
"The number 2 proof for God's existence is something called the second law of thermodynamics. Now, this law basically is a heat law in the beginning. It's a heat law, and a key principle of this is that everything will tend toward a state of equilibrium. Now, let me explain just what that means. Let's say I take a cup of hot coffee and a cup of ice, and I put them next to each other. Eventually, they're going to be the same temperature. That's the way that it works. This is a scientific law. This is the second law of thermodynamics. Now, this applies in, again, what's called a closed system, so assuming there are no outside influences coming in. And remember, since the atheist doesn't believe in God, he would consider the universe a closed system, since there's no God or anything else that would influence the universe. You also have a principle in the second law of thermodynamics that things go from order to chaos. This is entropy. If there's no God whatsoever, then here's what would have happened in the universe. We would have had a big explosion 15 billion years ago from a scrunched up little dot of everything in the universe, and this explosion would have gradually increased in complexity and design. And that violates the second law of thermodynamics.
Okay, so Dutko makes it sound like there's quite a bit going on here that he needs to support his second proof for the existence of God. But all he really does is confuse the issue and reveal how little he knows about cosmology and the Big Bang Theory and physics in general. Really, it's all pretty easy to understand, at least at an elementary level, if you just give a damn about the subject instead of your own personal religious beliefs. What Dutko is asserting with this second proof and the second law of thermodynamics is that this law prevents a universe going from an extremely small, simplistic dot into this complex, galaxy-producing, star-shining, life-supporting habitat for God-worshipping humans. You just can't get something as complicated and ordered as life on this planet from a tiny speck at the beginning of time. That's going from the simple to the complex, and the second law of thermodynamics prevents that. He's also arguing that the energy at the beginning of the universe would not be available today to create things like galaxies, stars, and little debbies, because the second law requires everything to go toward a state of equilibrium. You just wouldn't be able to use this energy to create new things. Well, what Dutko and all these apologists and creationists who think and believe like him misunderstand is that the universe is in perfect harmony with the second law of thermodynamics. When Dutko talks about 2 cups of water, one hot and the other cold, in the same room together, gradually coming into thermal equilibrium, that is, one cooling and the other heating up to the same temperature, he's using a false analogy. The universe did not bang into anything like a room in which all that exploded mess just flung about in random directions. When the Big Bang banged, it actually expanded space-time itself. So while the stuff of the Big Bang indeed began to move outwards toward equilibrium with the surrounding space, that space continued and still continues to expand, offering more and more space and time and opportunity for this stuff to reach equilibrium. You can think of it as a gas being released into a room. The second law of thermodynamics states that the gas will expand to fill the room, tending toward equilibrium. This is an increase in entropy, going from order to disorder, some like to say. But if you open a door to another room, now the gas has more space to continue toward equilibrium. By expanding the space available to the gas, you've actually decreased the available entropy, and now the gas is free to do more work toward increased entropy. And this is what's happening with the universe. In the early universe, entropy, or disorder, was actually extremely low. It was not, as the creationists like to envision, like a tornado spinning through a junkyard. This is so because the distribution of matter and energy was extremely ordered, as demonstrated by the uniformity seen in the cosmic microwave background radiation. Because particles of the early universe were so densely packed and uniform, there was a correspondingly high amount of energy with which to do work, namely, expand the universe. And because the universe is expanding, it keeps losing equilibrium, and this continues to increase maximum allowable entropy. In other words, the drive toward equilibrium in an expanding universe, following the second law of thermodynamics, creates opportunities for pockets of order without violating the second law. Think of the early universe with all that densely packed uniform matter and energy and compare that with what we have today. You may not initially think so, but the disorderly distribution of galaxies, star clusters, and gas clouds is far less orderly than it was in the beginning. But we're not done yet. Duco goes on to make an even larger blunder, revealing his ignorance about the subject.
So if evolution is true, if there is no God, you would have an explosion 15 billion years ago, and then gradually things would develop complexity and design and higher levels of complexity and higher levels of design. This is not only illogical, it violates scientific law.
Duco here makes the same mistake so many other apologists and creationists do. We've already seen how Duco misunderstands the second law of thermodynamics and its relation to the Big Bang and formation of our universe, but then he even stumbles applying it to evolution. He admits that the second law applies only to closed systems, but biological evolution occurs not in a closed, but in an open system. As noted earlier, pockets of order like our Earth form in the universe without violating the second law. Biological entities can increase in complexity because they use energy from an outside source, the sun. So clearly, Duco doesn't know what he's talking about. The idea that the universe is somehow in violation of the second law of thermodynamics is complete, uneducated nonsense. But I feel I have to ask again, even if the Big Bang violated the second law of thermodynamics, how is that evidence for God and not some other natural phenomenon we haven't discovered yet? This simply boils down to another call to just believe. Nope. Ain't gonna happen.